Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Now, I'd like to discuss kinship, social organization, and reproduction. This is arguably one of the most important themes in cultural anthropology, and for many years, this was actually the primary focus of what was then known as social anthropologists in the British tradition or cultural anthropologists in the American tradition. So, let's start with kinship. What is kinship? Well, you might have heard the term kin before, right? They are my kin, or you identify someone as kin. It's a shorthand way of saying family, essentially. But kinship is actually kind of more complicated than that. For anthropologists, we think of it as a system of social organization based on universal human experiences, right? Things like um, partnering with an individual or more than one individual, reproducing, right? Giving birth, caring for children. These are universal experiences across human societies and cultures. Now, again, as I just said, this has long been one of the flagship areas of study in anthropology. Like many other themes in anthropology, kinship shows us how things that we tend to think of as quote unquote natural or biological are actually very much informed by culture, right? So, how we couple up, how we give birth, or ideas around reproduction and birth can vary dramatically from one society to another. Right? It shows how something as universal as family can actually be extremely culturally varied. Right? Now, kinship was very important to early anthropologists when they first went into, say, a new society that hadn't been documented yet by, again, implicitly here I'm referring to Euro-American universities, right, or scholarship in the Western tradition, right? Anthropologists would show up in a new tribe or society and want to kind of provide themselves and the reader with a lay of the land. How does the society work? Right? Well, the first place you start is charting out members of that, say, village. How are people related to one another? Because if you can figure out how people are related to one another, then you can start to analyze these social relations, right? And early anthropologists thought that if they understood various kinship terms, which I will describe in a moment, that you could understand something about the underlying values or rules of a particular society. When I ask you to think about, imagine if you don't have one, but if you do have, if your father has a sister, right? Imagine this person, right? Or pretend that you have a father or father's sister, right? How would you label that person? Aunt, right? What about mother's sister? Again, aunt. But in many cultures, you would have just given me two different terms, right? They wouldn't both have been labeled under the same term. I will kind of explain how and why that is over the course of this lecture. So I couldn't resist. I had to share some amazing family photos that I found on the internet. But I do think it's of course kind of interesting to think about how family photos are one space where we articulate kinship, like who counts within our particular family. In North American tradition, this tends to be nuclear families, right? Who lives within a single household. We also might include pets in that family photo, as I have little Agnes here with me. She just growled for the mic. Gosh, you got some attitude today. Okay, sorry, she was napping. Um, but yes, human experiences like sexuality, conception, birth, and nurturance are all selectively interpreted and shaped into cultural practices that we think of in terms of relatedness as anthropologists. So one thing that I'll be explaining throughout the course of this lecture is that for anthropologists, when we talk about who we're related to in terms of relatedness, it's a very broad conception of how humans relate to one another. So probably more broadly than you initially think of who you're related to by blood or by marriage. Okay. So kinship, again, is a core aspect of what it means to be human. Knowing something about kinship says something about how we relate to other people, right? We define ourselves in relation or vis-a-vis someone else based on our kinship term. Right? Just like how ideas about time, space, gender, and language are often taken for granted by members of a given society, right? You might assume that, for example, the future is something conceptually in front of you. In some societies, in South America, they think of the future as something that's physically behind them. Why? Because they can't see the future yet. Anyway, when it comes to kinship, this too is something that we kind of take for granted, right? That we know what it is or what it looks like. But again, it will look very different in very different places. Kinship includes topics like descent, in other words, like who's related to who, marriage, who can you marry, who maybe can you not marry or have sexual relationships with, who is an ideal marriage partner, residence, where will you live after you marry if you get married, and how does inheritance work, right? These are all things that will vary dramatically from one society to another. But it also includes topics like or individuals like, say, godparents or roommates. Again, for anthropologists, when we talk about relatedness, we're thinking about it very broadly. Okay, some societies, like in Madagascar, have blood brothers, where you go through a ritual to literally exchange blood with one another. It's called fatija, right? So that would be included in relatedness. Those two individuals are not related. They do not marry. They're not related through marriage. They did not have children. They don't have any children in relationship to one another. There's no blood or marriage relation. The only blood relationship here is quite literally one of blood. So it's a friend who becomes so close that you go through this blood ritual with one another to exchange blood through a small cut in the finger, for example. So my point is, many different cultures have very different ways about thinking or conceiving this concept of who you're related to and how you relate to other people. Okay, I will continue the kinship section in the following video.